Thank you, Greg, and welcome to my podcast, The Human Side of Emergency Management. It's such a pleasure to have you here with me today. I just wanted to start off by talking a little bit about how you got into firefighting. So I've been doing a little bit of reading and a little bit of research, and plus I know you on a personal level as well. The one thing that struck me to set the tone was I didn't realize that you actually had 3 black belts in karate. And the reason why I mention that is because that people quite often describe you as calm in your leadership and your authority in the roles that you've undertaken. And people have actually connected those two together. So I found that very, very interesting in terms of that connection and then moving that forward into the work that we do. But at the age of 13, you actually joined your local, what we call now a rural fire brigade, a volunteer fire brigade. And I thought that was quite remarkable that you had that passion from such an early age. And that came from watching your father. And then within 6 years, you'd actually, I think at the age of 18, had joined Fire Brigade New South Wales as a permanent full-time firefighter.
Yeah, well, I had no choice, really. We lived basically over the road from the Bushfire Brigade shed, and it was a shed. Eventually got eaten by white ants and fell down on top of the old Chevy Blitz fire truck, 1942 Chevrolet Blitz wagon. And I just used to watch Dad heading off to fires in my childhood. And it was a rural area on the outskirts of Sydney, dirt roads, market gardens, and every summer there were fires. And it was just the thing you did. Everybody did something for the community. And in my dad's case, it was the Bushfire Brigade. He was one of the officers there. And my first big fire was when I was 12 with Dad, 1971, a big fire down the road, and all of our fire trucks were 15 kilometres away on the other side of the fire when it jumped the river. And he said, come on, give me a hand to help save a friend's house. So I was pretty much hooked. And when I was going through school, I remember the day actually doing my high school certificate in 1977. It was a howling westerly wind and about 38 degrees and total fire ban, and doing my biology exam in the school hall, looking out the window at the trees whipping around. Got it finished in record time, jumped on the bus, got home just as a fire siren went off, and ended up in hospital with burns and got overrun and nearly didn't make it. And my mum was pissed. She was not. Mum, the school teacher, said, "You're supposed to be studying for your maths exam tomorrow." But proof in the pudding, a biology exam, I got an A1 pass. So there you go. Fire. That was doing something for me. But yeah, look, it was in the blood. I found it fascinating. Dad taught me about fire behaviour. Mum knew all the plant species and how they grew and everything, and just got this amalgam of information from my wonderful parents. And they were both public servants, and it was all about public service and helping others. Yeah. And so it was pretty inevitable when I look back.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I got into firefighting back in 1987, I'd never really thought about it before in my life, but because I'd started work as a ranger in the national park, it was a part of your job, and you literally didn't have a choice. And same thing, once I realised what it was about and the effects and learning about the bush and how they interact, and I was pretty much hooked the same as well. Yeah, no, I can certainly relate to that. You worked your way up to superintendent by 1995. It's a huge journey, but you served 39 years in New South Wales Fire and Rescue, and then you became commissioner from 2017, responsible for an amazing changes to the organisations. And when I read through some of the information about what you achieved, I was really impressed. Back in the day, through the 90s, was sometimes a pretty tough gig. There was a lot of cultural change going on at that time. But in 1995, you were awarded a Churchill Fellowship where you travelled for 3 months around the world. And I found it quite interesting, the connection, because you witnessed what we used to call the incident control systems. And the reason why I mention this is because this is such a fundamental part of emergency management, because we use that management structure to manage everything from bushfires to building collapse to whale strandings. And I think my former fire control officer said he used to use it at the school fete. So I just found that really interesting, because I remember doing my very first ICS course in 1997, I think it was, and setting that groundwork. But that fellowship really introduced a lot of stuff that you also brought over, including what we call USAR, the Urban Search and Rescue. And I find that quite fascinating, that background of learning from those people and those experiences, because you spent a lot of time in America as well learning about all of this.
Yeah, look, the reason I applied for a Churchill Fellowship was the 1994 fires just came out of the blue, and I, before fire seasons, I used to talk to Dad and say, "What are you seeing, Dad?" And he'd say, "Oh, that species of wattle was flowering in August, shouldn't flower till September. That means it's been pretty dry and it's warmer than usual. If we don't get the October, November storms and rains, it's going to be a big season." But 1993 blindsided us. We thought it's all over. We got a fairly wet November, had storms and everything, thought let's flip the switch. And then we got these massive fires, the worst fires to date in New South Wales, hundreds of homes lost. And I was in the thick of it in Sydney, Lane Cove National Park, the Blue Mountains, Terry Hills, back where I live, rebuilt Mum and Dad's house and back where I grew up. And I wanted to know, what can we do things better? What's going on? So I applied for this fellowship, but going overseas was such an eye-opener. I went to Spain, France, Canada, the US, and I was able to even visit UK Fire Services, London Fire Brigade, for example, while I was travelling, and just soaked in so much information.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the incident control system, I'd done an AIMS course, Australian Inter-Service Incident Management System, and I knew the background of it in California, and it was so complicated at the time. And it didn't fit the urban environment. So I went to Phoenix, Arizona, met a famous fire chief, Alan Brunacini, who did urban ICS, the fire command model, and I was certified in that and was able to bring that back. But yeah, look, the big thing that came out of that, when I look back, is that everyone was saying, gee, the fires are getting bigger. We're getting more and more property loss, but we don't know why, because we've got better aircraft, better systems, better technologies, more firefighters, but we're losing. And this was where the penny started to drop about climate change. And remember a friend in Oakland, California, who's still a dear friend, he was a battalion chief, Bill Whitmer. And he said, "Have you read this?" And gave me a paper on climate change. And I thought, oh my God, this explains it. And that put me on a journey. But it was, and look, my career, I just joined at a really good time, because it was a very old, I've got to say, dumb culture. We had a board of fire commissioners and that just oppressed the people in uniform. I was on the union executive for 10 years. I learned a lot there about leadership, bad leadership mainly, watching what was happening in the fire service with the board and the executive dynamic, and thought, I don't want to be part of that. I want to try something different. And then after the 94 fires, they restructured. They'd got rid of the Board of Fire Commissioners some years ago, but our new commissioner, Ian McDougall, had been head of the Royal Australian Navy, and he just wanted to try stuff. And he let me off the leash, and I got to try stuff. And they were heady times. It was wonderful being able to implement urban ICS, help give a boost to the fledgling USAR capability until it became an international task force. But the cultural stuff, the deep cultural change, for example, gender equity, working on gender equity, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander firefighters, but respect for others, the values, who we were, not what we were, who we were, and what we'd tolerate and wouldn't. that was the stuff that really pushed my buttons.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that I was reading that I hadn't realized and I'd actually never heard about is you were the first government agency to sign Union New South Wales Dignity and Respect in the Workplace Charter to combat bullying and harassment at work. I thought that was pretty phenomenal. That must have been a
Yeah,
really
look,
critical mindset change for people.
well, look, it was. And when I first joined, there were all these dynamics. We had a lot of officers who were ex-World War II, and were damaged. A lot of them, seriously psychologically damaged by what they'd seen. And there was a lot of drinking. There was a strong drinking culture. It was all male. Um, a lot of testosterone washing around. But if you crossed someone, it wasn't unusual to be dragged out behind the engine bay and belted. That happened. Yeah, you had to be pretty tough. And people who weren't resilient in that regard suffered pretty badly. And then years later, there was the media got onto allegations of bullying, harassment, initiations in the workplace, and horrible stuff that everybody sort of had heard about, knew about, but some poor people had been subjected to, and it damaged a lot of people. And, to me, particularly as a union official for all that time, people would come to the union and say, look, I'm being bullied by a senior officer. And in a hierarchy, it was really difficult. If someone above you had it in for you, it was open slather. So we had to protect a lot of people. I just thought it was vitally important to send a message to the workforce to say no, and I don't care who it is, even if it's me. If it's me, go to the police or someone. It's okay to say enough's enough. We're not going to put up with this. But I wasn't silly enough to think that signing a bit of paper was going to change that that aspect of the culture on its own. So there's a whole lot of extra work over years, and anyone who thinks they can change culture by ticking a box and saying it's done now, it's like boiling water. If you turn off the switch, it's not boiling water anymore. It goes back to being cold. So it's constant effort, and it can be exhausting.
Yeah, no, I can imagine it would have been exhausting. Yeah, no, I remember back in the 80s when I was an apprentice, it was a very different world back then. And sometimes I reflect about what we had to put up with. And then I look at what we're doing now, and it's chalk and cheese. And I actually, my whole work life has pretty much been in male dominated environments. So, so that workplace dignity and respect is critical. And I know you also work very hard in that cultural change, because I know it wasn't until I think 1985 that women were actually allowed to join as firefighters. And I know recently they brought out a book and they've interviewed a lot of those women over, 40 years. And some of the stories were really heartwarming, but some of the other stories were really heart-wrenching. And you have that diversity also in the experience. But I know you work very hard to ensure there was 50% equity. And I think it took until 2016 before you had 50-50 in a recruitment college. And that's just an amazing feat, because, I know other states are still trying to even get to 30%. And I know when I did statistics for the Royal Fire Service for some programs that I ran for women a year or so ago, some of our leadership statistics were down around 2 and 3% still to this day.
Yeah. Look, that was, so again, I sort of go back to my childhood, my upbringing. Mum and Dad never stepped back from the good fight. I'll call it the good fight. So as a kid, I remember handing out letterboxing for the 1967 referendum to give Aboriginal people a vote. I couldn't understand as a kid why our Aboriginal friends weren't allowed to vote. It was just, and I knew one particular person we knew had been stolen from his parents, and he ended up, his health spiraled and he didn't live a long life. And there's all this injustice out there, but Mum was active in Teachers Federation. She was a teacher, so unionist, a feminist. You know, she mentored a lot of young women, and the stuff she went through, my sisters went through in the workplace, my wife, it was just, you know, and I used to say to some firefighters, so how would you feel if your sister, daughter, wife, mother were, you know, expected to put up with this in the workplace? They go, never thought of it like that. They go, well, you need to, because they're somebody's sister, wife, brother, sister, wife, auntie, whatever, you know. So there was just this cluelessness. Look, in terms of numbers, it was a boys' club. It was particularly with a lot of ex-military, and I'm not having a shot at ex-military people, just wonderful, salt of the earth. But again, they'd come from an almost all-male environment and very tough conditions that they worked in. And they were used to working with men in that tough environment, and they didn't quite know how to work with women. So in 1985, I was a union official, elected union official, and I visited stations. The union came out very strongly in support of the Board of Fire Commissioners, saying, yes, this is a good thing. People were pretty angry at the union for that, some people. But I think the silent majority were just, hey, if they can do the same job we do, we don't care. This might be a good thing. So, and the first women put up with hell. They were under the microscope every single minute of the day. And I remember one describing to me the archetypes. There was the divorced station officer who grabbed them, pulled them aside, said, I hate women and I don't want you in my fire station. I'm going to make it my mission in life to get you to resign or sacked. Then there was the Adonis who, you know, would expect them to fall for his manly charms and jump into bed with him as long as his wife didn't find out. And when they didn't, hated their guts and gave them a hard time. There was the dad who went, oh, I'll do that for you, dear, you know, and who were lovely, but they just wanted to do their job. And then there was the younger firefighter who lived, worked, been educated with women and went, oh, g'day, I'm Bob. How you going, sir? Let's go look at the truck. And it was so hard. But look, the 50-50 was an interesting one. Proof's in the pudding. I think Fire and Rescue New South Wales is sitting around 12% women. Now, another fire service is about 2, 3, 4% because they've done nothing.
Right.
They mouth off about it and they do nothing. And I'm actually really pissed off with generations of fire chiefs who mouth off about this stuff but say, oh, they won't like it. They being the calendar boys with the coconut oil who, you know, the dumb minority who don't want women in the job because it sort of, you know, makes us not tough somehow. So anyway, I'll park that, but you can do things. It was very controversial for a lot of women. They were affronted by it and let me know, saying, we've put up with enough hell. Now they're going to come out of the woodwork and say you've dropped the standards, which we didn't. We just had 2 recruitment pools. There's the mark you must reach. If you get that, then we'll recruit from those pools. Numerically, you'd never get a change. Well, I worked out it was 343 years to get 50-50 on the current recruitment, the way, because people stay for so many years. But, you know, we did it and made a difference. And then what it comes down to is that old saying, you can't be what you can't see. And all of a sudden, the recruitment numbers are going up. They don't do 50-50 anymore because they don't need to, because there's so many women's networks saying, hey, have you thought of this? Just like the men have had for 100 years. Now women are saying this is a great job, really terrific things you get to do, helping people. And so those networks are doing the job, but they didn't have the networks when they were 2 and 3%.
No,
so it's changed.
Yeah. No, I had the privilege last year of doing some work with Bronnie McIntosh with Girls on Fire. And the women that as mentors were just phenomenal, but the young women that were coming in and they were just like, yeah, there's no barriers here. This is what I want and this is what I'm going to do. And it was just really heartening to see that, because if I morph 12 months before that, when I was running a women's program for women in the Rural Fire Service, I'd rang up a friend and I'd said, you know, Can you just ask around your office and see some of the comments that had been given to them? And I was actually quite horrified. I mean, I've had comments thrown at me like, no, we really needed a man for that job, or, only the last 3 years of experience, you've been off on maternity leave or whatever. So, your skills all of a sudden become redundant. And I find most of the time it's not because it's malice or anything. They just end up in this like group think space, and it's comfortable. And when my friend got back to me with some of the comments that they've been told, it's like, is there a bloke around here because they're the only ones that can get things done? Or one comment I was just a bit gobsmacked with, where they were told, have you ever considered gender reassignment because only the males are going to be successful? And I just like, and I openly talk about this, and I say this because when people hear it, like with your reaction, they think, how can that even be happening now? And I'm thinking, well, yeah, it does, and it's getting a hell of a lot better than what it used to be. And I see that diversity becoming more and more critical, but it's so complementary to everything that we do. And you are so right. You can't be what you can't see. And that's been our mantra for quite a few years now. Because if you have a desire to be a firefighter and then all of a sudden you see someone like you being a firefighter, it's okay. Sadly, it gives you permission to go forth and do that. But it gives you confidence, more importantly, and I find that quite heartening. And I'm glad to see that it is changing, sometimes slow in some areas, but a lot faster in other areas. But that diversity is such a big thing for services, not just firefighting, that depend on community, that also are there for the community and want to work with the community.
Yeah. Look, Vivian, and I was horrified to hear what you said about what some men would say to you, and I've been there and heard those sort of things. But part of the inclusion space, so you can do the numbers, but if you don't work on inclusion, you're just putting people into hell, basically, where they've got no chance to actually be successful and to thrive. So part of that inclusion work was making it very clear that comments like that were not what a normal human being with half a brain would say, that they know they wouldn't get away with saying that at home, and they bloody well could be certain that they wouldn't get away with saying it at work anymore. And this is where the values came in. Look, it was some years later, 2010, I talked about media focus for about 6 months on bullying and harassment. I ended up having a heart attack out of that and nearly died, but I was targeted personally by a Murdoch newspaper. Funny that, they're doing it now because I talk about climate. But that it was probably the best thing that happened in the last 100 years to Fire and Rescue New South Wales, because it enabled the discussion about how the hell could people be treated like that in this workplace. It's not your club, not your personal domain, and, it's not a Darwinistic survival of the fittest thing. People should not be bullied, harassed, assaulted in the workplace. And it enabled that discussion about values. What are values? And we risk, respect, integrity, service and courage. And we had a big rollout and talked about what that meant. And we, at the same time, straight talk and system that ambulance had tried first. We thought that's pretty good. We modified it, but saying it's not okay to be spoken to or bullied, harassed, and here's what you can do. And there's levels, deal with it locally, escalate it, get mediation, or, ultimately you can go to the police if a crime's been.
Yep.
And it made a huge difference. And people realised, I wish Donald Trump had realised, that it's not okay to open your mouth when you've got nothing between the ears and all you've got is hate and horrible stuff in there. And there's probably being a bit rude saying that about him, but I think probably reflect views of most of the world. But it's reinvigorating damaged, nasty people to think that it's okay to talk like that. So reasonable people like us, the majority, need to say, hey, no way, we don't put up with that, we don't tolerate that. Be nice.
Yeah. No, it's so true. And I know when I've worked in male-dominated environments, yeah, even in just work meetings, I've sort of said what I think and then sometimes think, no, I'm going to have to say that again, just with a little bit more force. And so they actually hear what I'm saying. Um, and and it I've been very fortunate through my career that I've been supported by a lot of really positive males in my roles. And they've brought so much to my leadership in firefighting and the work that I've done and what I've been able to achieve. I mean, and realistically, when I started firefighting, there really was not many women around. So, but yeah, I'm very grateful for a lot of the male mentors that I've had all the years. But, you know, in the last 10 or 15 years, I've actually had female mentors, which has really added to that mix. And it's been brilliant. And I can't encourage women enough. If that's what you want to do, then go for it. And what I do is I surround myself with a good team. Have my tribe, and I've talked to them from all different walks of life. And that certainly supported me. And I think the one thing with your leadership, I think the minister actually described you as firm, fair, and fun approach to the job that you do in the service. And I thought that was a beautiful way to put it, because not only that, for me, and I've known you for probably over 25 years now. And the one thing that I was really impressed with, that in 2007 you actually went in the Mardi Gras in Sydney and you went with 50 staff. And to me, that you are putting your efforts and your beliefs in actually showing what you believe in. And I thought that, you know, for 2007, that was a very, very positive initiative. I felt that you do it. And now when I look at the Mardi Gras, it's just the norm. People just do it and they participate. It's not questioned anymore. It's just, in some areas you're probably expected to. And I think that's a great thing in showing how we've actually moved forward as humans.
Yeah, look, so the Mardi Gras was just the other weekend, and Commissioner Jeremy Futrell asked me if I could come along because I didn't realise it's 20 years since Fire and Rescue first marched. And I remember a little delegation coming to see me in 2006 with a proposal about going on. And previous fire commissioners and chiefs had said, no way, no, we're not getting involved in that. And so they gave a presentation and I sat there stony-faced, and this particular firefighter, Andy's going, and I said, there's only one question I want to ask Andy. And he said, yes, sir. And I said, what are we going to wear? What are we going to wear? What colour? And he's gone, and afterwards, he actually got really emotional. I pulled him aside. I said, you okay? And he said, I've been a firer for 20 years. He said, I've hidden who I am, you know, part of who I am. And you're the boss, and you've just said it's okay to bring all of me to work. And, you know, and he said, and I opened up to the guys at the station, and they all just, he said it was a bit of an eye-opener because they all said, we know Andy, we've always known. What are you talking about? Why don't you bring your partner to barbecues and stuff? We always wondered what happened to him. And it was, but it had a huge impact on me. I didn't realise, you know, a marginalised section of the community for so long, and being able to say, here I am, this is how I am. It's really got nothing to do with work, but I'm glad, you know, that I can just say this is part of me, and my employer and my organisation support that. So it means so much. And after that first march, I was able to get heads of other emergency services to come along and support their staff as well. And I remember a head of the state emergency service, he said, we're going to have a competition to see who can have the most glitter on. Dude, but I won. And it was fun. And the crowd loved seeing the fireys, you know, and it just, but it was, again, part of that unfreezing of that old macho male culture that needed to break down so that people could come up with new ideas, because it just put a lid on everything. You couldn't come up with new ideas or suggest that, hey, maybe old woolen uniforms with brass buttons isn't the best thing, because when you go into a hot basement fire, you actually get burns from the brass buttons and your old helmet melts. Maybe we should do what other services do and get some aramid fibres and different helmets. And no, we've always done it that way. but so it unfroze a lot of that. Just let's try different stuff and let's be nice. Just be nice.
Yeah, no, it's really doesn't, in some respects, change is really hard, but there's certain things that you do and you step out that comfort zone and it sort of enlightens that change and it gives people permission to shine. And I love that aspect of helping people to be authentic and be who they are. I just sort of want to move on a little bit now. So in 2017, you retired, but your passion never leaves you because I think once you're a firefighter, you're always a firefighter. And in your book, you talk about, in your book, Firestorm, Battling Supercharged Natural Disasters, you talk in the beginning about March, what we call the Black Summer Fires. And I'm just going to read a little bit out of your book because I just find it so poignant in terms of stuff that we go through as firefighters. So I'll just read briefly. As of March 2020, an estimated 24 million hectares had burnt nationally, destroying and about 5,900 other buildings. At least 417 people died due to the effects of smoke, 35 people in fires, and an estimate 3 billion vertebrate animals were killed or displaced. Some species have been driven to extinction, and economists believe that more than 100 billion in damage was done to the economy. But as firefighters, some lost their lives in the line of duty, including 3 US firefighters aboard a large air tanker that crashed in southern New South Wales, a young father who died with a freak weather event picked up his fire truck and dumped it on its roof, and 2 other young fathers who died at Bargo near Sydney when a tree crashed through the cabin of their fire truck. I was a couple of kilometres from that scene when it happened, and following a long day of fighting fires as a volunteer firefighter and remembering the shock and despair when we received the news. Nothing can prepare you for the news that a colleague had been killed on the job. It's that shared trauma, I think, that we face as firefighters. And quite often I feel the only ones that really understand the depth of that feeling is the people that have actually gone through it with you. And that's where we link into like the teamwork and what I call the emotional bucket and what we go through. I was just sort of wanting to touch on that a little bit because after 2003, a lot of people then, when we went through the fires in Canberra, a lot of people say, oh, you're heroes. But that's on the surface. You look a lot deeper. And I know one of our volunteers who lost his house, almost lost his life. He said, we're not heroes. We're just here to help. And that was a bit of a staple of what we all believed. But I quite often talk about this emotional bucket. And when it gets to being full and overflowing, that's when you reach out to your teammates and your crews and you share that emotion together. It's something that we try not to do in isolation, and it's something that's really hard to describe to the everyday person.
Yeah. Look, I retired in 2007, early 2017. I was only 57. I had an open-ended contract. I could have stayed, and I didn't divulge it at the time because I just couldn't talk about it. But I had to retire because I was suffering from serious PTSD. The things that pushed me over the edge, which is probably bad terminology given how I felt, but firefighter fatalities, I just didn't have another one in me. And if you read about leadership, particularly in the military context, there's things like the burden of command, and it is lonely at the top because you're playing a role, and there's old adages, leadership's an act from start to finish. You had to look like the strong commander and be strong for everyone. And that took a real toll, and I knew that I was unwell for years. I'd seen a lot of trauma in my life, and there was one particular incident involving a child many years ago that I had nightmares about most nights, and told myself that was normal, but it was ripping me apart. And lost a firefighter at a building fire in Western New South Wales, and just all of the trauma for the family and everything, it brought me undone, and I couldn't do another one. And I remember the months leading up to my retirement, I didn't sleep much. Every time the pager went off, I'd startle reaction thinking, no, please, please, please. And I'd have a look and it'd say, oh, 7th alarm, factory fire. And I'd go, oh, is that all? Thank God. Some poor companies lost and workers have lost their thing, but I didn't want another firefighter to be lost. So, and this is what I think a lot of people don't realise about leadership positions. You take it all on. You can't avoid it. And if you don't, you're not a very good leader, because a lot of research, the best leaders actually love their workforce, will die in a ditch for them. Shouldn't say die, but will do everything they can for them.
Yeah.
But will make tough decisions that are sometimes unpopular, and then you cop it for that. And you just keep taking stuff on. And look, looking back, I was commissioner for nearly 14 years. There was only one served longer than me in 1898. And I asked the fiery historian who wrote a book about that, said, oh, what happened to him? He said he died at his desk in headquarters. He served for a year longer than me. I thought, well, that's a message, time to get out. I know we don't use quill pens and ink anymore. He died with his quill pen, and they found him in his office dead, and I thought, from stress. And bugger that. Yeah, you got to be prepared. It is lonely. There's a whole lot. There's a unpacking of that leadership space, but you can only do it for so long. And look, losing a colleague who have family, loved ones, just like all of us do, but their second family, the fire service, whether I know them or not, their family. I see emergency service deaths in other countries on the news, and I get pretty emotional. I've got to walk away.
Yeah, yeah. It's a
very. So it's
I describe it as a collective pain, because everything that we do in the environment that we work in emergencies, everything is really based on teamwork, about strong leadership, about putting yourself in environments where you got to push yourself and challenge yourself way beyond where you ever thought you could go. And then you got to sort of turn around and then go home and back to normality. And it's those challenges, but going through it with those people and that team, for me, is one thing that has kept me going. And the friendships that I've developed over the years, those people would die for me, literally. And I would do the same for them, because we always had each other's back. And thank you, Greg, for sharing those stories, because this is a part of why I'm doing this podcast, because we just don't talk about it enough and share. And the more we talk about it, I think the more it helps. I remember years ago speaking to a psychologist about trauma, and she said, you got to tell your story at least 25 times before it starts to lose its grip. And to me, that's one big thing about trauma, is actually talking about it and sharing it. And, I had a friend who went through a fire. He was an agronomist, but had supported a lot of people that went through fires, and he literally could not talk about it or what he'd done. I said, you've got to get it out of your system. So I actually got him to take his horse for a walk every afternoon and tell his horse, just afternoon after afternoon, just to try and get it out of your system. And I think when we talk about it and we share it, it becomes so important, but it also recognises what we're going through. And thank you for sharing those stories, Greg. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and Vivian, on that, the culture of the fire services in the past has impacted on the ability of people to open up and be authentic and say, hey, I'm not okay, because it was so male-driven and that macho sort of image. And I remember, this particular one I used to have nightmares about. That was 1987. It was, vividly Liverpool and Liverpool Street in the city and doing CPR on this poor young girl after a car crash. And would I have said to the guys on shift, oh, gee, I didn't feel real good about that? No. And if I had, they'd say, oh, let's go and get drunk. And, and that was their way. And the higher up you go in the organisation, the less networks you have because you're isolated, because you're a boss. And so you're basically on your own. And I didn't want to bring it home. I should have, because my wife was a healthcare professional and understood all that. But no, I just bottled it up and I got sick. I got really sick. So yes, it's just essential to look after yourself. And you talked about my martial arts training before, which I've trained in martial arts since I was 10 years old and met my wife in a karate class. She beat me up the night I met her, but she's so cool. That's about strength of mind and everything. But you learn to compartmentalize things, and it was like putting stuff in a box. I had the mental strength to be able to do that, but it came back to bite me. I realise now I should have opened that box and dealt with the stuff years ago, but until it got too hard to keep it closed, and it came out like a jack-in-the-box and grabbed me by the throat and threw me on the ground. But I've got through that. There's light on the other side as long as you get good treatment. But I found it hard to open up because of that command and control hierarchy and the act from start to finish.
Yeah, it is hard as a leader. I know sometimes when I've been on the fireground as a sector leader or a divisional commander, people look up to you. And I used to have this little mantra I used to say to myself all the time, especially during 2003. I'd say, stay calm and speak clearly. Stay calm and speak clearly. Because I found if your voice started to escalate a little bit, the panic on the fireground would just start to escalate. But if you stayed calm and you stayed focused, people really valued that style of leadership because they felt confident and they felt comfortable and they felt safe in themselves, not in terms of what's happening around them. And I just found that really important. But it is also critically important to talk about that because I know after 2003, I had a network. There was about 8 of us that stuck together. And whenever one of us was falling over, the other ones around us would see it and pick me up. And then I'd see them start to fall over and I'd come over and pick them up. Or if I had an experience, I would share it with them and they would say, oh, yeah, Vivian, you know what? I actually had that a couple of weeks ago, but they knew exactly what I was feeling by sharing our stories together. I just found that so important and so critical.
Yeah, those networks. And look, unfortunately, the further up you go, the smaller those networks become.
Yeah.
And it's, I had someone describe it to me as who can you trust to actually open up? It's awful, but the answer is, well, not many. You've got to, probably at home, that's about it. But most blokes won't open up. So, and that's why that culture change through diversity in the workforce, whether it's gender, lifestyle, religion, colour, whatever, is so important because that actually opens up conversations and changes the culture from the station mess room up. It's sort of bottom up.
Yeah, quite often when I've been very fortunate in my career and my life that I've been able to mix with people like you and other commissioners at all sorts of different levels. And when I see some of my friends, whether it's in Victoria or Queensland or even overseas, and I see that they're caught up in a really bad situation, I'll usually just send them a funny photo or to say, hey, how you going? Just a quick text. And I think I probably might have even done it to you over the years, just to let people know that, look,
yeah, you have.
We understand and someone cares, just to give you that little bit of, yes, there's someone out there.
It means so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I encourage other people to do the same, not expecting anything in return, but just to let someone know that we care and there's compassion out here. And for me, it's always important never to forget the good things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, those networks. And look, I did have an international network, and we would reach out to each other. And they're about, when you're at the top, they're about the only ones you can really talk to. So interstate, the chiefs would talk to each other and great friendships that exist to this day. And that's sort of my climate group, ex-chiefs.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
we've all got a shared passion to push for more climate action, but that started with our friendships as being in similar positions and supporting each other.
Yeah, having that common knowledge and understanding is critical. And I was actually going to ask you about ECLA, because it's something, every time I see someone that I used to work with, whether it's a former commissioner or someone else that joins your organisation, I sort of go, yes. It's got a lot of power and a lot of strength to it. And I just love the work that you guys do, because you've got that collective wisdom, you've got that collective knowledge, and it's, in my eyes, it's something that can't really be questioned because there's quite a lot of you involved in the emergency leaders for climate action. And we see it at the coalface, and we see the effects that it has. And I think it's great work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, look, it was, after I retired, as I said, after the 94 fires, I started to research climate change and spoke internationally about it. 2004 International Fire Science Conference in Dublin, I went over and spoke about climate change and fire services and told the UK chiefs, you're going to start getting bushfires. And
Yeah.
they were, what, really? And, I remember 40 homes burnt down on the outskirts of London in bushfires on a 40-degree day. And I had a couple ring me and say, you told us about this and we didn't believe you. But we've got 38 former chiefs from every fire service in Australia, chiefs and deputy chiefs, a lot of SES, National Parks, Forestry, so Forest Fire Management Victoria. Through those 2019-20 fires, we tried to warn the government and early in the year, in April, that there was a bushfire catastrophe on the way. And because of ideology, they just didn't want to talk to us. And as it just unfolded, and you talked about the two young dads who were killed down near Bargo in December 2019. And what really upset me so much about that was we'd been warning the government, they're not going to stop a tree falling down on a truck, of course. It emerged that the Prime Minister had secretly left the country to go on holiday and said, I don't hold a hose. And at the time, the media wanted me to attack him. I thought, I'm not going to personally attack someone. But over the years, I've got angrier and angrier about that comment because it was so dismissive. And the thing about leadership is when there's a crisis, you've got to be there. And
Yes.
And it wasn't just him, it was his whole government. And the leader of the Liberal Party now, we met with David Littleproud and Angus Taylor in, I think it was November, it might have been December 2019, and we were just fobbed off. It was just, but anyway, we've pushed hard. We put information out there. Recently we did a report about the Los Angeles fires. Could they happen here? That's got international readership, and
Yes.
we'll just keep plugging along and trying to warn governments about what's coming and what's already here, as we've seen in Victoria this year, catastrophic fires there, and what they must do, and not pretending that they're doing enough, because they're not.
Yeah. And when the fire stops, that's not the end. It goes on for many, many years. And yeah, look, I and many others, you see it firsthand, and it's going to keep working against us in the future. And I really can't commend the work that you guys do enough. It's critical work in terms of the understanding. I first started seeing the changes and I questioned, I think it was back in 2001. It took me quite a while to work out what it was, though, and climate change absolutely does make sense to me. But I know we're sort of running out of time. I just have a final question that I'd like to put to everyone at the end, trying to sum up. The question I just want to ask briefly is, when everything else falls away, the roles, the expectations, the pressure, what remains at the core of your leadership? What is it, the one thing that keeps you going? When I've asked this question, people talk about
Um,
their core beliefs, compassion, love. It's a lot of different areas.
yeah. So look, I really had to think about that, particularly through that period where all the media scrutiny and everything, and it comes down to your personal values. And this is why, with the climate battle, I suppose, all of us could have just stood back and go, "Oh, we don't want to go there." It is an arena, and it's like, it's gladiatorial, it's death to the loser sort of thing. That political climate war. And we lost a lot. The people involved in my group, like, we don't get government work. You're too controversial. So we've suffered financial loss. We've been bagged publicly by the Murdoch press, by politicians, but we believe in it. So you've got to hold those core beliefs and say, and in my case, I look at my two beautiful grandsons and I think I'm going to do my best
Mm.
to make sure that they've got a livable planet when they're my age or even younger, because it's changing so fast. And I want them to know that their granddad, Pop, didn't cower before the political onslaught or the media lies. He just stuck to his guns because he cared about us and he loves us. And again, those core values about being nice to people, just treating everybody as if they're good people until they prove otherwise, and then you deal with that, but in the calmest possible way you can by turning into someone like them.
I know, and that I actually have a core purpose statement that I developed quite a while ago, and that's what I live by, and that reminds me all the time about my purpose. And you've certainly articulated that very well, and I can't thank you enough, Greg, for being a part of this podcast. It's a new avenue that we're going down, looking beyond the leadership, looking beyond our command and control roles, and looking at the human side of what we do. And I really appreciate your time. I love your honesty, and I really appreciate everything that you've said in terms of its authenticity and your stories and living and breathing, but more importantly, sharing that. So thank you.
Well, Vivian, I've got to say, thanks for your friendship for all those years, but your incredible leadership, particularly when there weren't many senior women leaders around. You were there, you did the hard yards and you suffered for it, but you still keep putting your head up above the parapet because
Absolutely.
you're a good human being and you believe in it. So look, you've been a mentor to many, and I just want to thank you for everything you've done because you're amazing.
Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate it. And thank you for being on my podcast, The Human Side of Emergency Management, because as I keep saying, it's at the heart of what we do.